My name is Neo Madiba, and I'm a sales consultant here at uAfrica. So my day-to-day duties at uAfrica includes assisting merchants to fulfill their orders, obviously finding a shipping solution for all the parcels that they want to ship out, be it from an online platform or just creating manual orders. And one of the main questions that I receive almost on a daily basis is, what do I do when my customer wants to return an item? And that is essentially what my presentation is going to be about today, how to handle and reduce returns. So I'll be talking about the return policies, adding new ways for customers to return products, your returns window, exchanging products instead of offering straight out returns, and just basically looking at your data just to basically make a decision based on the information that you receive from that. And then at the end of the presentation, I'll just be giving out tips in terms of mastering and just basically handling and reducing your returns. All right. So the very first thing that you need to basically have if you're shipping products, or if you're obviously sending products to your customers, is a returns policy, which is just basically information that the customer needs to have in terms of how you guys process returns of the parcels that the customers purchased. Right. So it is very, very important to have a return policy. Number one, for general information, right? Obviously, customers need to understand the store policy in terms of what's that the returns of the store. So it is definitely quite important to ensure that you then understand why you then need to have a return policy in place. So obviously, if you have a return policy, that's the first step. The second step is then to obviously decide on what you need to include in the return policy. So items that you can include, obviously this is not an exhaustive list, but you could include the products that qualify for returns, the return window, damaged items, obviously how to go about processing and handling products that get damaged, right? Or maybe when the customer receives them and they're in a damaged state, you need to then include that information on your policy. Courier information, this could range from your collection, delivery, ETAs, as well as processes that the customer just basically needs to find out, right? Such as who's going to then be liable for the return. So it's quite advisable that you just basically touch base on that type of information. You can also include your vouchers and your coupon information. So sometimes customers, when they make a purchase on your online store, perhaps they receive a discount, coupon, and they use that, right? And then now when it comes to them returning an item, is it still valid? Will the customer receive the coupon or the voucher back? So just basically touch base on, obviously this is a business decision, but you would then need to obviously make a decision in terms of how to process returns when coupons and vouchers are involved. And what you can also do is touch base on invoices, receipts, and packaging. So when you then ask your customers to prepare the parcel for a return, do you need the original packaging? Do you need the original invoice? So such information, it's quite important for you to include it in your returns policy. So now, the difference between a good policy and essentially a bad or poor policy, it's just the information that you obviously put out to your customers, right? Good return policy does not necessarily have to be long, does not necessarily have to be short. It just basically needs to include all the relevant information that the customer needs, right? And as I said, that's obviously for you guys to then decide what you then want to include in the returns policy. Poor return policy, it's just the opposite of that, right? It's unclear. Certain conditions are not laid out correctly on the returns policy, right? The customer might just be confused in terms of the conditions, who's responsible for what, how do I then go about packaging, who's going to organize the courier and stuff like that. That essentially is just a sign of an unclear or poor returns policy. And I mean, you could obviously go to a lot of online stores and just quickly have a look at the return policies. Most online stores definitely have information relating to returns. Could be at the top of the page of the online store or somewhere at the bottom. There is where you'll find information relating to your returns policy. Example of a returns policy, I mean, Take a Lot. They have an extensive return policy where they outline literally everything in terms of the reasons why customers can return a product, the time frame, damaged items. So it's quite exhaustive. I think that's just one of the examples that I can provide in terms of like a good return policy. And yeah, that's just pretty much it in terms of returning. I mean, just constructing a solid policy. You don't have to overcomplicate things. Just make sure that you include the relevant information for your customers, all right, to make the process smooth and seamless for your customer. Which brings me then to my next slide, which then touches base on finding ways to give it to your customers and options of returning products, right? Typically, what would happen ordinarily, customer would receive the product, they would then reach out to your merchant where they bought that specific item from, and then from there, just arrange or just basically request a return of a parcel, right? So obviously that's how typically returns work. But you can also maybe be innovative in terms of you could offer different ways that the customers can initiate returns, like an in-store exchange policy. If you obviously that depends on whether you are an exclusively online platform or you obviously have warehouses or distribution center like brick and mortar stores, right? So if you then basically have those establishments, it makes it quite easy for customers to then come to that establishment, try out maybe a different size to obviously process that return. I mean, obviously, if you're an exclusive online store, then you can just quickly mention the fact that returns are just basically handled by the courier, right? And speaking of obviously the processes, it's quite advisable for you to obviously ensure that you invest or just basically partner with a solid return management system or create a solid return management system, either through processes that you employ in the business, or you can just basically use a platform that basically allows for you to simplify your return just by clicking a button, right? One of the advantages of such systems is that they send tracking notifications to your respective customers. Right? Obviously, when a customer returns or requests a return, one of the major things they request, one of the major items that they request is tracking information that relates to their parcel, right? So you could then have a system that can just basically accommodate that, right? And one of those platforms is uAfrica, where we then have a simplified returns process. All you just basically need to do is log in on that platform and then just click a button that just basically allows for you to create a return where all that information will then be processed and sent to the customer, and then you can customize the tracking notifications as well, right? It makes it much easier as opposed to you then requesting a return, sending an email or WhatsApp to your customer. Literally just by a click of a button, such a system, the uAfrica dashboard, will obviously process that specific return and send all the relevant information to your customers. So it's quite important as well in terms of the information that the customers receive, that they then get easy to follow instructions to initiate like a return, right? So obviously when the customer receives an item in a damaged state or they want to return it, firstly, they just basically need to, from the get-go, have steps that they need to follow to obviously initiate the return. Once that return has been processed, they then obviously need to get information in terms of what to obviously process, the steps that they need to do to get that parcel prepared for the courier when the courier gets there to collect the parcel. So just basically offering solutions or multiple ways for your customers to request a return, right? Your email addresses, contact details, cell phone number, WhatsApp, email, live chat. Those are, as you can see, typical, normal ways where customers can then initiate a return. So the rule of thumb is just basically simplify the returns process and still give your customers options. On your online store, you could then redirect them to like a form where they need to fill out, where they can then request the reason why for the return. As long as you can then make it easy for the customer to then initiate and return a product, then everything else should be work itself out. And then in terms of the return window, this is essentially the period that you give that just basically allows the customer to still return an item. This is typically subject to your business, your processes, as well as the products that you guys are selling, right? So obviously, depending on what items you guys sell, it will obviously depend on, influence and impact the returns window. As I've stated in your returns policy, certain products you can include the fact that they are not returnable, like your perishable items. You don't necessarily want customers to initiate returns on perishable items. And obviously, the longer the return window is, obviously, the more confidence it gives to the customer in that they can then still have the product, use that specific product, and know that they can still have that opportunity to return that specific item should they not perhaps be happy, or maybe they might have issues with the specific product, right? Obviously, you'd want them to have a proper solid return window, but just don't make it way too long. So the customer might actually abuse that, right? So typically, I've seen customers, large corporations like Takealot, returns window is generally about 30 days, right? But obviously for small guys, small companies, you won't necessarily want to, you'd want to actually consider the return window for the mere fact that you don't necessarily want to give the customers like a long period of time to still be able to return the item, right? And obviously that should be then communicated clearly on your returns policy as well. So another thing in terms of your returns window, case-by-case consideration. You'll definitely find customers that maybe might not touch base or read up on the returns policy in terms of when can they return, how long do they have actually to return an item that might then initiate a return out of the return period. So obviously that my advice would be consider it case by case. Some customers, depending on what item they return and the reason why, right? Because obviously, if a customer has confidence that, you know what, this company is making compromises for me, obviously that definitely as a returning customer, they might then come back and obviously continue making purchases from you. So case by case consideration, just ensure that obviously as a business, you have a lookout and just basically have a way in terms of how you guys can deal with those cases where customers reach out to you to request a return out of the normal returns window. And that brings me to my next slide, where it obviously then touches base on offering exchanges instead of returns. So customers would then reach out to you, and then you perhaps might just offer returns as opposed to then, exchanges rather, as opposed to offering returns. Obviously, it gives a customer option of obviously getting a different product as well. You could still outline that in your returns policy, just to ensure that everything is as detailed as possible. Obviously, you shouldn't be too pushy and insistent in terms of exchanges, right? It's obviously advisable to just basically communicate with your customer in terms of maybe the specific products where you don't return, but you might just offer an exchange, right? I mean, most customers, if they then find out that, you know what, I can get an exchange, perhaps it's a smaller size, I don't necessarily want a refund. If that's clearly communicated to them, they might not actually want their refund from the get-go, and they'll be happy to receive an exchange as opposed to a return. Right. Another thing that you can also do is offer store credit. Customers might be insistent on receiving a full refund for their item. Perhaps maybe they might not be happy with how certain things were communicated or the product itself and request a refund. Obviously, as a business, you wouldn't want that. So alternatively, what you can do is just to offer store credit, like a coupon or a voucher, as opposed to giving the customer a full refund. Some customers might still insist on getting that refund. I mean, obviously, in that particular case, depending on your policies as well, you will then go ahead and then refund that specific customer. Obviously, that's a loss. To your business, but obviously, there's certain steps that you can kind of take before you get to that point, right? Which obviously brings me to the next slide, where you will then have to review your data to reduce returns. So obviously, as a business, you want to then keep returns as low as possible, right? For the products that your customers sell, you primarily do not want your customers to be requesting returns all the time, right? So it's important to review the products that are returned and the reasons why most products are returned. Identify and try to address the core reasons why customers are initiating returns, right? Obviously, from your online platform, if a customer requests a return, you could then pop them an email just to basically specify. You could make that as a requirement actually for them to indicate why they would want to return a product. Could find that it's a sizing issue. I mean, in that case, for you to obviously try to overcome that, you might just basically want to offer sizing charts on your online platform just to basically guide and provide as much information in terms of sizes. Could be the color, fabric, material. Generally, you'd obviously want to provide as much information as possible. You could include links as well, videos that just basically gives the customers more information before they make that specific purchase to avoid a return, right? So just have a data reviewing process in terms of why is it that products are being returned. Obviously, like I've mentioned, you want to then ensure that you keep returns as low as possible, right? And yeah, that's just basically my take on the whole return process. The next slide just basically offers just general tips and advice about returns, right? So obviously, if you're selling online, or if you have an online store, even if you don't have an online store necessarily, but you're still selling on an online platform with social media, just know that returns are inevitable. Customers do make mistakes on sizes. They might not actually be happy with the product, because sometimes what the customer sees is not necessarily what they might receive. Perhaps it might just be wrong, or might just be an inch off or something in terms of like the color, the size. The color wasn't too red enough, or it wasn't too blue enough for me. I thought it would be a bit more blue. So those things do tend to occur. So they're quite inevitable. So obviously, it just requires you to be prepared. Provide as much information as possible that is clear, and you always should be transparent, because now that's the information that you give out to your customers, right? And the major thing that I would advise in terms of processing the return is use a return management system that can easily handle returns. I've mentioned the return process on uAfrica, where you could just literally click a button and then you can then go ahead and process your return. Obviously, if you're selling items, you will receive a whole lot of orders, right? Now, in terms of the volume, it makes it much, much easier for you to manage your returns, right? And lastly, just consider your courier carefully, right? There's cost implications as well. And obviously, returns mean that basically means that the courier rather, will then have to go through to your customer and collect that specific parcel. You obviously want to do research in terms of how the courier will then process that return in terms of proof of collection from your customer. Certain customers don't even know what a waybill is, so just basically consider a courier in terms of that regard. And with that comes to the end of my presentation. I hope my information in terms of return will be of great use to you. And if there's any questions whatsoever, please do feel free to get in contact with us through the details that are on the screen. And thank you so much.